Rachel just listening in,
And Joel.
Yes, I'm just listening.
and Joel. Okay,
Hi, Rachel.
just, I don't want to go to jail.
No, no jail time.
We appreciate you listening in, and thanks for being here. I don't see, oh, there, I see Randy joining now. I was going to say, we're not going to get far without him. So what do you think, Jane? Should I call the meeting to order?
I think you certainly could.
Okay, it's 3 o'clock. Let's go ahead and do that. All right, so because we're on Zoom, I need to take a roll call of the commissioners attending the meeting, even though I can see you. Dave Cahill?
Here.
Thank you. Deborah Doyle?
Here.
Thanks, Deborah. Thomas Hauser?
Here,
And Barbara McKenzie?
Here.
Thank you. Okay, public appearances. Members of the public who wish to address the commission regarding matters not on the agenda. Do we have any members of the public who are here in the meeting and want to address us? Jane, do you have any messages from people who wanted to have information included in the meeting?
No, there were none today.
Okay, thank you. All right, then next item, consent calendar. We don't have any items for the consent calendar, nor do we have any action noted items by motion. So we're going to move to the discussion items. And before we get started on that, a couple of things I wanted to say. We're going to defer item 6.3. We had a little miscommunication on that. We will not have that information for this meeting, but going forward, I have asked Ann to provide that for us on a monthly basis until further notice. We're really fortunate to have Randy Seipel here in the meeting and also on our team generally, because Randy has jumped in and been of enormous help to us during this rather tumultuous period when we're without a CFO. And I asked Randy to kind of do I'll call it a basic education for us. You can think of it, I guess, as Finance Committee 101. And so we have really two topics that we're going to ask for Randy's help in reviewing. And I just wanted to say a little bit about each of them before we get started. The first is an overview of the Sonoma County financial system. And the second are the specific financial reports for September and October. We're really year to date through October, which we'll review one at a time. I asked Randy to begin by giving us a little overview on the financial system. I don't expect this will be a one and done, but rather I think it's going to be a little bit of a continuing conversation. But I'd reached out to Randy about this because in the 2 years that I've been on the commission, I've heard at different points various commissioners say, gee, why do we have to be on the county financial system? This seems cumbersome, not clear that it's a benefit, there may be problems. And given everything else that's going on, I certainly don't want to advocate that we try to switch financial systems now. Rather, I think it would be a benefit to all of us to understand what it is that we are working with, how well we're working with it, what benefits it can provide to us, and maybe what additional capabilities it has that we're not aware of. And so I thought it would be helpful before we dove into the specific financial reports, if Randy could begin this process. And Randy, I know we communicated a little bit by email, but I realize I've not given you a lot of time. We're not expecting an Academy Award production here, but, appreciate what you can do to begin to educate us on the county financial system. So you ready to take over at this point?
Can everybody hear me?
We can hear you, yeah, and we look forward to the
Great.
day when we can see you too.
Well, I appreciate you teeing it up for me like that. Hopefully the expectations are not real high. I did what I could over the weekend to throw this together. Right now on the screen, I see the second page of what I provided this afternoon. Is it possible to have the first page brought up?
Sure. That
There we
one?
go.
Okay.
Right. So my approach was based upon what your request was, Andy, kind of like an EFS 101.
Yeah.
So I thought I would just kind of put together just kind of almost a stream of consciousness of what I know and what I understand about the EFS system and how we use it and what are some of the functions or features of that system that are helpful and useful for those of us who are on the user end. We have a number of different clients in our division, so we're always using the system. We're always pulling information out of it, providing monthly reports, ad hoc management reports, et cetera. So based upon that approach, again, this is what I put together. So if it's okay with you, I guess I'll just go down the page here.
Yeah, please do. And again, I'm just going to ask everybody to keep in mind, let's consider this the first step in a process that is likely to continue for some time. So I don't expect it to be exhaustive, but I think anything you can do that will provide a strong foundation for our understanding will be helpful, Randy.
Absolutely. I don't want to hit you with a fire hose of information, that's for sure.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, this is Barbara. Can I just say a couple quick things? One is it's very, very small. And if it could be blown up. And secondly, my understanding is when we have more commissioners than are on the committee, we normally wouldn't have this, their pictures on the screen. I don't know if that's an issue at all with the Brown Act, but normally it's just the members of the committee, and I'm seeing everybody, and that's fine. I like seeing everybody, but I'm just wondering if it's an issue. But I would like to be able to read this better.
Well, certainly, Jane, thanks for making that larger. I have no insight into the vagaries of the Brown Act. I think we've acknowledged at the start that we have some observers who are not participants in the meeting. Is that sufficient, or do we need to ask them? Deborah, that's okay?
That's just fine. If they want to watch, they must remain muted, please. And they cannot speak or participate.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Is this large enough for viewing? Can people see this okay, Barbara?
It's tiny on my iPad.
Okay, let me
do
try
my
a
best.
couple more.
I don't want to have my nose right on the screen.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
You're going to have to move it over just a little bit so it's centered, Jane, and then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Barbara, you can
there we
also make your own screen larger. So with just fingers on your iPad, at least that's
good.
what's happening with mine.
Good reminder.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. This looks good. Thanks. And Randy, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So the Sonoma County Enterprise Financial System, or EFS, as it's called, is actually a customized version of PeopleSoft, which is created by Oracle. Essentially, it is the county's general ledger. We did have a question not too long ago about what is a general ledger, so I thought I would throw out the definition here. Basically, a general ledger is an entity's record-keeping system for all financial data. All transactional data, all financial data is segregated into accounts that make up an organization's revenues, expenses, assets, liabilities, and net position, or fund balance, as we sometimes call it on the governmental side. EFS is basically a comprehensive financial management system in combination with other systems that the county has. It's able to provide several functions, including but not limited to, we produce all physical checks out of the system. We are able to track all checks that have been issued, i.e. if it's still outstanding or has been cashed. There's a budgetary control component that I'll get a little more detail into in a little while. Electronic storage of all transactions and backup documentation. That's through a system called OnBase. So all transactions that are entered into the system are required to have some kind of backup attached. So again, it's all electronic through the OnBase system. We have access to that for as long as the system is up and running. Makes it very, very helpful for doing research. Any transactions that happened in the past, we can pull up the actual documents, see what the actual transaction was for. Been very, very helpful for historical research. Other functions include cost accounting. EFS is very, very robust cost accounting capabilities. In addition, we can do contract encumbrance accounting, which I know is something that the library does not currently do. I don't know if there are any questions from anyone about what encumbrance accounting actually is.
I have a question, Randy, because I've never heard that term. What is encumbrance accounting?
So essentially what a contract encumbrance is if you have what we call a supplier, or people also use the word vendor, that you do a frequent amount of business with, that you actually have a legally enforceable contract with. What we do with an encumbrance is we reserve that part of your budget for that contract. It's a budgetary control tool, so that so when someone's looking at their budget, line item budget, they'll see that they have, let's say, $100,000 to spend on various supplies. That doesn't tell you how many contracts you've entered into. You may actually have already obligated yourself more than $100,000. So to avoid that, we use encumbrance accounting. So every time you have an actual legal contract, we encumber how much that contract is for against the budget. So then when you're looking at your budget, you will only see what's actually still available. Again, that's something that I would say a majority of departments in the county utilize. And I mentioned here that the system does a rollover of outstanding balances to subsequent year's budget. That probably sounds a little confusing. Basically, what that means is that if you haven't exhausted the entire amount of the contract encumbrance, when the year closes, the system rolls it over into the next year's budget, adds it to it. The thought being that has already been approved by the board or the commission in the previous year for use of funds. So even though the contract, or since the contract was not actually completed during the year, it's still valid. It gets added on to the next year's budget. I'm sorry?
May I ask a question about this?
Yes.
Before Jody left, I think at the last meeting that we had with her, she had talked about setting something up for our capital projects. Is that related to this? If we were setting up a capital project that was contract based, would it utilize this function? Would it in fact be this function, or are they unrelated?
Absolutely. That's where we see it most commonly used, is for capital projects. So you generally have those large contracts out there. So it's really wise to go ahead and make sure you recognize that right away, as you may have budgeted, again, using the same number, $100,000 for capital projects, and you just award a contract for $90,000. We only have $10,000 left. If you don't encumber that contract, someone else coming along may still see that $100,000 and think they have that available to enter into another contract. So it's a really good budgeting tool.
But we're not using it now.
Doesn't appear so, no.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No, not a problem. The next thing I have on here was automated year-end closing. That's probably true for any electronic system these days. I just threw that out there. Basically, that means is once all entries are in, the folks that run the system push a few magic buttons, and the system does its thing and closes all of our temporary accounts. And by temporary, I mean the revenue and expense accounts, and updates the balance sheets. And you then have a complete set of financials to prepare your audit for the prior fiscal year, and it opens up the new fiscal year. Internal control structure is inherent in a system like this. I think more specifically that we see with EFS that we did not have before we had EFS is the electronic approval process that's set up. So every single transaction that's entered into EFS must be approved by someone in the department that's initiating that payment. So basically it's a internal control that you know that someone from your department has approved it. Once it's approved by someone on your side, then it's electronically sent to our office, into our claims division, for them to do their final approvals and get it through the system. And the same can be said for budgetary control processes. It's all electronically controlled. As I mentioned earlier, that as far as budgetary control being a feature, if we can go down to the bottom, that'd be possible. So the asterisk notes that budgetary control for independent districts, which is what the library is, or JPA, is always at the fund level. So what that means is that there is no budgetary control at each line item. There is no budgetary control for each department that makes up a fund. It's for the fund itself. So if you have an approved budget of, let's say, $1 million, the system is going to let you spend up until you reach that $1 million in any account you choose. It doesn't matter if you set aside $100,000 for capital projects. It's going to let those transactions go through until you hit that $1 million threshold, and then it will stop processing any transactions at all.
Now that, again, sorry to interrupt, but although we do not have budgetary control at the department level or the line item level, we still do have electronic approval required. Is that correct? Up
That's
above?
correct.
Okay. Now, it sounds like this, the fact that we don't have budgetary control at the line item or department level is a function of the fact that we're an independent district. From your perspective, is that a significant drawback or limitation of the system for us?
Not necessarily. I think as long as you have adequate review, monthly reviews, reports available to you so that you can see what is happening on a periodic basis to make sure that the budget that you approved is actually being adhered to as close as possible. Obviously actuals never meet budget, exactly. But as long as you're comfortable, you have that internal review, I think it works fine.
Okay.
If we can scroll just a little bit further back up again. I just want to touch real quickly on the chart of accounts. EFS has a very robust chart of account system. There are thousands and thousands of different accounts that have already been established. That being said, there is still the capability if there's ever a need arises that you need some type of unique reporting or tracking, we can establish additional accounts. Again, it goes through a pretty rigorous approval process to make sure that it's actually necessary. The county is very sensitive about kind of overwhelming the system with too many accounts, but that is a possibility. And I just want to go over real quick. It's really easy to know what type of account you're looking at simply by the number that you're looking at. All accounts are 5 digits long. The leading digit will tell you exactly what type of account that is. So anything that starts with a 1 will be your assets, 2 are your liabilities, 3 is your net position or fund balance or equity. That term makes more sense to you. Those are what we call your permanent accounts. Those are what would appear on your balance sheet. And then your revenues all start with a 4 and expenses start with 5. Those are also referred to as temporary accounts. Those are the accounts that are closed out each year end into your permanent accounts, or into your net position, I should say. That makes sense. Anyone have any questions on that? No? Okay. I just thought I'd put down a few common terms you'll hear when you're talking about financial accounting or terms that are used when we're talking about EFS. You'll hear the word journal quite a bit. A journal is basically a tool for posting financial transactions that don't actually involve the cutting of a check to an external entity. They're called suppliers in EFS. They used to be called vendors. I'm honestly not quite sure why we switched to suppliers, but that's the word we use. The most common time or common place that you'd see journals in use would be for actual deposits, any transactions between your funds and other departments that don't require the actual cutting of a physical check, allocation entries. So from what I've seen, the most prevalent of these with the library are recording your payroll expenses. Since your payroll is handled by an outside firm, you get the reports from them of how payroll is supposed to be applied, and then your accounting staff goes through and actually assigns all those costs to the proper accounts in EFS, and they're doing that through journal entries. And finally, accruals. These are your year-end transactions where you're recording payables and receivables. That's when you'd use a journal. Now, a voucher is when you actually are generating a physical cash payment, either a check or an ACH payment to an outside entity. Again, so the underlying entry for any voucher would be your actual cash will be reduced and an expense will be recorded, or if you're paying off debt, you'd be reducing that liability. Transitional cost accounting, or a TCA, the library is utilizing these. This is the most common way that departments set up their cost accounting. And so basically, if you're not aware of what a TCA code is or what the whole purpose of cost accounting is to provide a little extra detail for those transactions, revenue and expenditure transactions. It gives you the ability to drill down to see what makes up that expense. Most commonly used would be, again, your capital projects. If you're looking at a budget to actual report, you're going to see that you spent $100,000 on capital projects, but it's not going to tell you what capital projects you spent that on. So user codes, or sorry, not user code, a TCA code gives you the ability to see exactly what that capital project money was spent on, which projects. Finally, I want to touch base real quick on the difference between fund and department. I think most everyone knows that a fund is an accounting entity with a self-balancing set of accounts, including a balance sheet. The fund is the highest level in the EFS infrastructure. And as I mentioned, budgetary control in EFS is at the fund level for Sonoma County Library. The next subset of a fund is what we call a department, or actually we call it a department ID. And every fund can be made up of several individual departments, but all those departments will roll up into that individual fund that is basically the parent to all of those department IDs. It should be noted that every single transaction that's posted into EFS has to have the coding for both the fund and the related department ID. So do anyone have any questions for me on that first page?
Yes, Randy, this is Dave. I noticed you've used the term balance sheet a couple of times in this page. I've never seen a Sonoma County balance sheet in the 2 years that I've been on the commission, except for a balance sheet that was included that was for June 30th of 2018, which was included in the audit report for fiscal year 17-18, which we got in January of 19. So we normally don't. We get what generic they're called monthly income statements, the revenues and expenditures. But if they are self-generating, it would be really nice if we had a balance sheet for last June 30th. You know, where the left balance is the right hand. We don't get them.
Okay. I would be happy to add that as a additional informational tab to the monthly reports. I don't want to assume anything, but would you only be wanting to see that for sales tax and property tax, or would you like to see that for all of your funds?
I'd like to see them for all of it.
Okay. I will make sure that gets added to the November reports. I do want to say, as I say that, when we get to the actual September, October reports, there is a fund balance tab that's included in that monthly reporting package that does show a portion of the balance sheets. I say portion because it's only showing the relevant balance sheet accounts that make up your fund balance. But when we get into the actual monthly reports, I'll delve into that a little bit further.
Thanks.
So there's no more questions. If we could switch over to the other tab that was originally up. There we go. So all I was doing here was really trying to just illustrate, again, the whole point about how you have at the fund level is the highest level in EFS and in governmental accounting. So for your property tax, which is Fund 74805, it's actually made up of these 25 department IDs. Again, this is from 2019-20. This is what your actual budget for that fiscal year and your actual results, your actual revenue and expenditures. I guess one of the things I also wanted to point out is that, again, it goes to the budgetary control. You'll notice, let's say, if you look at regional branches under Fund 74805, it's like the third line down. The budget was 4.4 million. The actual expenditures, if you go over a couple columns, was just under 4.7 million. It's again just kind of illustrating that although you had a budget set up of 4.4, you were able to exceed that because at the total fund level, you look at the very bottom totals, you did not exceed the total amount of budget or appropriations that you had. You had 22.3 million in total expenditures budgeted. You only ended up spending 19.9 million. So therefore, everything that was processed against every one of these department IDs did not have a problem going through. And the same applies to the sales tax. There are not quite as many department IDs were in use. I think there's 20 there. But again, it's just my attempt to kind of illustrate that relationship between department IDs and the fund, to use actual real life numbers in there.
Can we ask
Anyone have
questions? Yeah.
Yes, please.
This is Barbara. I found this interesting and also confusing. The confusing part to me was if you just take a chunk of that, like the public services chunk, and look under expenditures, it's not very detailed in the budget column, but it's more detailed in the actuals column. And where are those decisions made to, break it out differently? You know what I mean? It's not budgeted very specifically. But then, I don't know, I just found it confusing to try to, follow the comparisons between the two.
Now, are you referring to the public services under the property tax section of this page?
Yeah,
Or
just as example, it's just kind of big numbers there. It's 5 million, and then under regional branches, 4.4 million, and then over in the actuals, it's broken out in a lot more detail. Suddenly we're seeing 44,000 for central library, and you see that the detail doesn't.
right.
doesn't
So,
seem to be
so
parallel.
you have to keep in mind that the budget this is what was actually budgeted in EFS for each one of these department IDs, and then where there are actual transactions recorded. So yeah, there is nothing budgeted at all for central library. No revenues, no expenditures. However, we did record or post transactions for revenue and for expenditures. You'll see that in a number of places. There are a lot of department IDs that didn't have budgeted at all, and yet they did have some transactions. For me, when I was preparing this, the ones that kind of make your eyebrows raise a little bit would be something like delivery services with a negative $890. That's the only transaction that they have in there. Or training help desk of negative 9,500. I can't answer as to why that was. I'm just presenting the actuals that did post.
But this is our staff posting in this way. Well, when you're talking about eyebrow raising, like under central library, the revenue, suddenly there's $48,000 of revenue to the central library, which I was like, why would that, where did that come from? I don't know. It just seems strangely posted to me. And you're just pulling it out of, what you have, I realize, but these other decisions along the way and their actuals, that's done by the library staff.
So I think this really points to the importance of having that monthly reporting and review, someone to go over this, because, there are a lot of department IDs here. There is a lot of opportunity for human error, hitting the wrong number. All these are valid numbers. So the system will not accept something that's not already been set up. So if we don't have a thorough review, on a monthly basis or quarterly basis of all transactions, you're going to end up with something that looks possibly this confusing. My whole, coming from not a heck of a lot of experience with the library, it looks like, I put the dark underlines, what look like basically were maybe divisions. The intent was to separate these out as divisions of the library or sub-departments. I'm not quite sure. But my concern, and I brought this up earlier, is that it's unusual to see so many department IDs. I thought maybe perhaps they were being used to satisfy your cost accounting needs that could possibly be addressed elsewhere, so that we could strip down the number of department IDs we see here, and you'd actually have all of your transactions deposited or posted to those department IDs that you actually created budget for or approved budget for.
Yeah, that on the face of it seems to make sense. And Barbara, I appreciate you bringing that up because, yeah, it's illuminating and confusing.
Yes.
But Randy, I'm going to repeat what I think I heard you say, which is that you would, in general, suggest that expenditures should appear in the same or against the same department ID as budget. And if there's no budget, you shouldn't be able to have an expense item against that. Is that so that you're, yeah.
Yeah, my concern would be as you go into the next fiscal year and you start preparing your next budget, when you run a report like this, okay, where do our actual expenses hit? How do we budget for the next year? Is this going to be helpful, or is this going to just cause confusion? As you point out, there's $48,000, or I should say $296,000 in Central Library. Nothing was budgeted. Well, so should we actually create a budget for Central Library, or should that have appeared somewhere else, so that when you do your next year's budget, that it all kind of flows and makes sense?
Right. But I'm also hearing, I think, that from your perspective, there's a lot of different items here, maybe more than you would think might be necessary.
To create individual budgets for, yes. Again, this is just from my experience. I would think that the utilization of cost coding or cost, the TCAs might be a better way to go. And again, I say that respectfully because, again, I've only been looking at the library for a couple of months and I don't know your internal needs, what stakeholders you have as far as this type of reporting. And maybe it is absolutely necessary that you have it shown this way. I'm just saying, just from my perspective, that I was really surprised to see this many department IDs associated with your funds.
Fair enough. I know we've just taken half an hour to go over this, and I am anxious to look at the financial reports, but I found this very helpful. Do any other members of the committee have any questions for Randy at this point? Or with this information, can we now start to look at the specific reports that were included in the package?
Lee, I just have one general question. This is a good explanation of the county system. We have heard that the library has a system as well, and that they don't necessarily work together that well. Does the library, in fact, have a separate system? If so, what's it called?
I'm not aware of any separate system myself.
Yeah, the
Okay.
library does not have a separate financial system. We have a separate system for payroll.
Oh, I see. Got it. Okay.
Which is why payroll has to be handled through a journal entry, right, Randy? Because we're
Yes.
not paying, because it's not a direct cash payment.
Yes, since the county itself is not processing your payroll, then it's being done by an outside agency. Yes, we have to journalize everything.
Okay, and is that, just curious, do other independent districts typically handle their payroll the same way that we do?
I see a mix between both. We have a few clients that utilize a third party to do their payroll, and they do the same process with the journal entries. It's really just a matter of your preference. And I'll be honest, I don't think the county's payroll department has bandwidth to take on too many new clients at this point in time. I know they had to turn a couple folks down in the last couple of years. So
Okay.
I would go with the whole, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You know, what you have is working, stick with it.
Okay, so just to follow up on Dave's point, because I think there's just some general confusion about this. The library does not have a separate financial accounting system separate and apart from the county EFS system. We do utilize an outside payroll service. Are those correct statements?
Yes.
That sounds correct to me, yes. What is your timekeeping service, Anne? Or do you use TimeSaver? Does the library use TimeSaver?
No, we work with a company called IBS.
Okay.
I have a question. This is just because this is 101. And do you have a staff kind of overall comment about, not to put you on the spot, but do you have just kind of an overall comment about what we've heard? And, you know, it's almost like, are there any additional footnotes that we should be aware of?
No, I think Randy's given a very good overall presentation here, and I agree with him. I would like to simplify our record keeping. We have a lot of different codes here, and you know, when you're doing manual code entries, it's easy to make a mistake. So the simpler and more streamlined we can make it, the better.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Other questions?
Andy?
Yeah.
Yes, I have two comments. One one is for Randy. What we're seeing on the screen right now, that page, when I got this the other, I don't know, Friday or whatever it was, or I printed it out and took it home to read it so I'd have the time to do it. When I printed it off, it cut off just practically all of the right-hand side of the page, so that the sales tax, I really couldn't see it. And that's a PDF that somebody created that was given, and then when you print it, it's too big to get on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. So that's just one of the pet peeves that others have expressed and I'm expressing right now. And the other thing is, the biggest concern I have is that we have people at the branches who, friends of the library and foundations that have given money, and the library is having trouble figuring out what happens to that money and how much is spent and how much isn't spent. And I'm sure Anne can, I don't want you to try to solve that right now, but if you haven't talked to Ann Hammond about this, I'd really like you to talk to her about that, because she's very aware that this is something we need to figure out how to deal with. So those are my two comments.
Thanks, Tom.
And I apologize for the PDF, but that was me to set that up. I will do in the future. I'll make sure I put them on letter size and not legal.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? Okay, what I'm going to suggest that we do, and Randy, again, sorry to put you on the spot here, but you are certainly the man of the hour for us. I'd like to go one at a time through the reports that were in the packet, understand what we're looking at, and ask questions or make suggestions relevant to each. So the first one, which looks like it's identified as 0.04, is this next page that Jane was pulling up. It's the top, it says property tax, sales tax funds as of October 31. I think I know what I'm looking at here, but I'd like you to tell us what we have here, please.
Okay. So what my goal was here was, after I attended the commission meeting, was last week or 2 weeks ago, the folks who did the presentation for Measure Y, your sales tax, had a very similar structure or format to what they for the financial results, I think for 1920, for your sales tax fund. So my idea was to try and replicate that format that they put together. If you recall, the September reports I gave you, I had a completely different format for the summary page. And I thought it was well done, what folks put together for Measure Y. So my attempt was to combine both property tax and sales tax funds, your two primary funds, together into a very high level, easy to read summary of the activity by month for both your revenues and your primary revenues, property tax, sales tax, and then your expenditures. And the reason why you see I guess I have 5 hash marks under services and supplies. I was just looking at the highest budgeted line items under services and supplies. These can be interchanged for anything that you would prefer to see on a summary page. This is just what I threw out there as a sample again. But again, everything on here is linked to the detail tabs on the monthly report or the monthly Excel worksheet that you have. Nothing here is hard coded. It's all linked to the finer details.
So,
and as always, I've mentioned before, whenever I prepare a report, I always like to make sure that I'm showing that it's reconciled to cash. So both beginning cash, the actual results for that month, revenue, expenditures, any adjustments to the cash that we had to do for those transactions that don't run through revenue and expenses to arrive at the ending cash. And this is all reconciled or balanced to the EFS system. I think you'll see if we went to the next tab, the cash balance summary, that the ending cash for October, the 21/9/21 would be on that cash balance summary.
okay, well, I'm gonna hold off on that for a second. I have a couple of questions and a couple of comments on this first page that you provided, and I want to invite the other members of the committee to comment too. First of all, I really like the fact that you are reconciling to cash. That's something that personally gives me a sense of assurance. Is that in fact the correct cash balance for each month? The ending cash number.
Yes, it is. It's pulled straight out of EFS.
Okay, that's great. Then the first question I have is one that Dave Cahill had, and Dave, I'm not trying to jump in front of you, but that bottom line that says adjustments to cash, would you talk about that a little bit, please, and help us understand what that is and what we should expect to see in that category, Randy?
Sure. The adjustments to cash is how we reconcile those entries that affected cash but don't run through revenues and expenses. The most common of these and your biggest number is always going to be in July, because it's basically your accruals, your payables, and receivables that you booked in June at the end of the year. The money's actually going out the door for your payables, and in many cases is coming in the door for your receivables. but none of that runs through revenue expense because we already did that in the previous year. So that's going to be the bulk of those adjustments that you see. Other things will be like the unrealized gain and loss. That is a non-cash item that does appear in your revenues and expenses. So we have to identify both non-cash and cash transactions that either appear in the revenue expenses or don't that affect cash. I'm sorry, that was a mouthful right there, but essentially that's what it is. You'll see the 428.81 is, I know it's kind of hard to go scroll through all this, but the detail tab for property tax and the detail tab for sales tax, at the very bottom, you'll see the actual detail of what those adjustments are by account.
I see that. I do see that. So I'm going to play back a couple of things. The fact that we see a large number in July, this is not a fudge factor. This just is means that expenses that were accrued prior to fiscal year end are now being recorded. And it has to do with the difference between the cash and accrual system. Is that right?
That's correct. So I can tell you just in the property tax fund alone, there was, it looks like about $467,000 in payables that cleared out.
Right.
And when I say cleared out, it means that the cash actually left in the month of July, but those expenses were recorded in the month of June for year end.
So obviously the numbers in the 3 months subsequent, are not as substantial. What should we be looking for when we look at the detailed information around adjustments to cash, if anything? Is this something that we need to pay attention to, or is it something that 99% of the time is simply going to be an accounting adjustment that doesn't materially impact our adherence to budget or expected revenue or expenses?
I think more the latter. It's more of an exercise that we on the accounting side need to go through, that I insist everyone on my staff goes through to make sure that we are actually identifying every single thing that hit cash. It doesn't really have much of an impact as far as what you would be looking at from a budgetary perspective.
Okay, thanks.
It's to make sure that you have that faith that everything has been captured because we are reconciled to cash. And obviously, when you're looking at those, and you're right, sometimes there are very big numbers. By all means, let us know or let me know if you have questions what they are, and I can go into more detail if necessary.
Dave, does that meet your concern about this item?
Oh, yes, definitely. Thank you.
Okay. Then I had another question for you, Randy, and I don't know that you would necessarily know this, but I'm looking at footnote number 2 that says 4 pay periods posted in September, 2 pay periods posted in October through 10/10/20. And I'm trying to understand what we're actually seeing here. It looks to me, although it doesn't say it in the note, it looks like 1 pay period posted in July, 1 in August, 4 in September, and then 2 in October, but only through the 10th of the month. I don't understand how that could be since they're 2 weeks apart. What is accounting for the fact that we're just not regularly seeing 2 pay periods a month and occasionally 3, and why there's a long delay here?
Well, generally, there is almost always a timing issue when it comes to payroll. Generally, on the county side, when we have our payroll expenses, it takes about 10 days before we actually get the reports from the pay period that had closed. So we see that in the 2 pay periods post-October through 10/10, the pay period that ended 10/10, we don't get the reports for that until maybe the 18th. So that's basically, what gets posted. The next pay period didn't close until 10/24. We wouldn't have the information for that pay period until the following month.
Excuse me.
I
Excuse me.
understand,
I've
and I see a note from Richie
Far. Yes, she's the accounting manager. Go ahead.
am I saying her name right? Richie?
I believe so.
Apologize if I'm not. Says the journals were not done in time. I'm not, again, not looking to critique anything, but just to understand, okay, today's November 16th, right? So if there was a pay period October 10th, presumably the journals would be done, a week or 10 days later. If there was a pay period that was October 24th, again, the journals would be done a week or 10 days later. That's normally why we have the finance committee meeting in mid-month, to give the accounting team adequate time to close out the reports from October. So I guess I'm just trying to understand what's causing the delay and what can we expect to see going forward. If we continue to meet mid-month, can we expect that we'll have relatively complete financial information through the end of the previous month?
I would like to think that, again, the payroll is a unique animal when it comes to the reporting. And it's always important to know through how many pay periods have actually been posted. There really isn't much that we can do because, it takes, like I said, 9 to 10 days, whatever, to get those reports and to actually compile those, get those submitted to the county for processing. And sometimes there can be delays in the auditor's office from processing those journals as well. So I'm not overly concerned. I think if you're getting 2 pay periods in, I think that's perfectly fine. The fact that 4 hit in September, there may have been a delay at some point for the August pay periods, but it all kind of evens out. I think, again, if you know how many pay periods have been posted, you can kind of do the correlation or the math to see how many pay periods are left, just to make sure that, on a percentage basis, how much of the year has been processed.
So along those lines, I'd like to make a request going forward with this report that we always include a footnote which shows the specific number of pay periods included in every month that's on the report. So for this report, it would be helpful if the footnote showed us how many pay periods were included in July, how many in August, how many in September, and how many in October. And as we add future months, let's show how many pay periods there are so that we don't ever have to ask about it. And it's clear if it's not what we might expect. Is that something that we can accommodate?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in the Excel version of this report now, I don't know if you have that up by chance, there is a cell note that I added into every single one of the cells for that entry. Shows which pay period is included.
That's great. I apologize. I'm not looking at that, and I've only got one screen, so I can't.
No, I can certainly add that in as a footnote as well, because I know that when you're looking at obviously a PDF report, you don't have that ability to see what the cell notes are.
Okay. And
I do have the Excel spreadsheet available if you'd like to look at that. I need some guidance as to what tab to look at. Would you like to pull that up?
Could we ask some other questions about this report before we go there?
yeah, I think let's hold off on that for the moment, Jane. It's good to know. Yeah, Barbara, please go ahead, because I've got a few things I wanted to add, but I'll wait.
Just one comment and then 2 questions, and I'll scrunch it all together to save time. I do like this report. It's nice and compact. I do like the fact that it shows from one month to the next, which is something I think we've all wanted and we haven't been able to see. I'm just wondering, though, just in terms of the structure of this report, if we're going to be able to, if this intended to be quarterly, or we're going to be able to keep adding months on there and it's going to get real broad. just what it's going to look like. I really like seeing each month, but I don't know how this report's going to look. Secondly, I wondered about, I thought we were on a cash basis, so I'm a little confused about the accrual part that you were talking about at the end of the year. And then lastly, I think we've had a confusion in terms over what we call fund balance compared to how you described it, Randy. And I'm just wondering what we were considering fund balance, which was kind of like the savings, where that shows in our reporting, and probably not this page, but going forward.
Yeah, to your first point, the intent that I would have is to every single month would be added onto this report. And I could actually expand it to where it's always shown just as the detail tabs. All 12 months are shown, but we would be showing the estimates for subsequent months. Right now, all the estimates that are in each of the detail tabs are essentially the prior year actuals. That's generally how we do these reports for our other clients. I'm always open, or actually I encourage you to let me know if you have any changes or requests to change to the actual estimates when those are presented. These are meant to help you.
So are you talking about this page that we're currently all looking at, or you're talking about the additional pages farther on? I would like other people, I couldn't get into the bigger, broader, detailed ones. I'm wondering what this report's going to look like.
Yes, I was referring to this page
Okay.
As well, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And again, I'd like to add in other information that are on the detail tab, such as the year-to-date totals, how the year-to-date compares to the same number of months in the previous year, which is something that Andy had requested that were added to the October report. So, yeah, I'm open to revising these.
So along those lines, Randy, I'm going to jump in for a sec. I'm going to ask that you, going forward, we lay this out horizontally rather than vertically, so that we can, add subsequent months. And although you did include this on the detailed reports, I would, on this summary page, I would like to please see 3 additional columns. The year-to-date actual, the year-to-date percentage of budget, and the prior year actuals. I know you had that on the detailed report, but I think if we can add those to this page, this is going to be the single page that will be of greatest interest and concern to the commission. And we'll be able to focus our attention as a committee on more of the detailed reports that follow. Is that something that you could do to accommodate us?
Absolutely. Yep. I will incorporate that in your next report.
Yeah, that would be great. Any other questions, comments, requests, suggestions on this one report? Okay. Before we get into the next report, I guess I have a question for you, Randy, because I noticed that we've got several pages on sales tax. We then also have some pages on property tax. Do you have a recommended or preferred order in which you think we should review things in order to get the best picture, or from your perspective, it doesn't matter?
I would suggest that the order you go in would be the way the Excel spreadsheet is set up. So the summary page that we're looking at now is your first stop. The cash balance summary, I actually think, is really useful from a high level to look at next. And the main reason why I say that is when you look at the cash balance summary, you can see the change in cash month to month for each one of your funds. So you can identify or pick out a fund that had a major change that you may want to look at the details for. If something looks very static, didn't change much at all, that might be a signal that, okay, I don't really need to spend too much time looking at the detail for that fund.
Well, what I'm going to suggest then is for our purposes today that why don't you take us through the reports in the order that you would recommend that we review them? So what I hear you saying is that you would suggest that we turn to, it's actually page 14 in the packet. It's the last page in the packet, and that's the cash balance summary. Okay, Jane, we're going to need your help in enlarging this and centering it so we can read it more clearly.
So again, so what this is just showing is just at the highest level what the cash balance is in each one of your funds. You know, I mentioned that the very first page you're looking at, the summary page, we had an ending balance for sales tax and property tax of $21,921,621. You see that number is here as well. So it gives you the breakdown between how much cash is in property tax, how much is in sales tax. You can look at it comparatively month to month as far as the change. It looks like the one in sales tax for September kind of got a little crossed out. You see from September to October in sales tax, we went from 12.9 million to 13.5. So, you know, it went up 600 some odd $1,000. If you want to know why, then you would click on the actual detail tab for sales tax and take a look at the activity there. You know, conversely, gifts and donations, not a heck of a lot has changed since the very beginning of the year. We started the year at $1,614,000, and we're sitting at $1,652,000. Keep in mind that since we are in, this is through October, interest has posted for the first quarter. I'm guessing that's probably the lion's share of that increase in cash. And then your other funds are all basically very static. There hasn't been much change at all in them. So this is something I look at this, you know, obviously the lion's share of your activity is in your property tax and sales tax funds. This is kind of confirming that that's the case so far this year.
And what this would say to me, I think, is, okay, we have not received any property tax, and so we're going to expect that fund is going to be decreasing. On the other hand, we have not only received sales tax, but our sales tax, as we'll see in a moment, is actually a little bit above expectations. And that's why we're able to see an increase in that account. But overall, our cash balance is declining, as we saw on the previous report.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions? Any questions from the committee on this report, cash balance summary? Okay, what would you suggest we look at next, Randy?
I would think that the transactions above 25,000, simply because I think that's a unique report for the library.
Okay, I'm very anxious to look at that because I have a bunch of questions about it. So this is on page 11 in the packet. Yeah, you were there, Jane.
This one?
That's it. Yep.
Okay, good.
And so, and I'm not sure the best way to do this, but Randy, here in looking at this, I had some questions, and what I guess, and maybe this is just my my ignorance, but I assumed that some of these numbers, or the total of some of these numbers, should match up with what I'm seeing in the detailed budget to actual reports that you had for property and sales tax. And I wasn't really seeing that. Can I show you where I had some questions?
Sure. If I could just jump in real quick, you would not see much of a correlation there. Again, because these are showing only those voucher payments. So by voucher, meaning that we actually cut a physical check that were over 25,000. And generally, each of those accounts are going to have significant number of other smaller payments that wouldn't make it onto this list just by virtue of the fact that they were less than 25,000. So I'm not sure you'd really be able to tie any of this into the detailed reports.
Well,
But
can I show you a few specific items that, because if what let me show you what I'm seeing, then let's talk about it. And maybe this report is not as useful as it might be, but if you look at the report that Jane has up now, and we go down to July, for janitorial services, we see $32,896, right? Everybody see that? It's third item down in the month of July.
Yes.
But we don't see janitorial services appearing for August, September, or October. Now, Jane, I'm going to ask you to please move to page 8 in the report. Yeah, we're going to need to see the left-hand side of it so we can see the various account names. You know, we got to go all the way to the left. The right is not important here. And we need page 8, please.
One.
At the top, it says property tax budget to actual. No, you're too far. Okay, stop there.
There we
Yeah, this one. Okay, now please enlarge that. Keep the left end of the frame so that we can see it. What goes off to the right doesn't matter.
Okay. Is that a good
And
size?
yeah, this is actually okay. If you look down toward the bottom of what's visible on the screen, oh, you can stop. In services and supplies, you can see item 51032, janitorial services. Everybody see that?
Yep.
Yeah.
And for the month of July, we see 32,896, which matches up perfectly with the 25K and over report. But for August, says 31,912. And the same for September. And for October, it says 26,720. All of those amounts were over 25,000, but none of them show up on the voucher payment over 25.
And most likely, the reason for that is that it may have been multiple payments that made up that amount. I'm not going to say that for sure, but the way that the filter is built for generating the data, I'm pretty certain that you're looking at multiple payments.
That might very well be true, Randy. I guess my question is and this is for you and also for the members of the committee. I think the purpose of the voucher payment over 25K is designed to help us keep an eye out on very large expenditures. Is it useful as is, where only a single voucher of 25K or more shows up, and where it looks like please don't take this the wrong way, but if somebody were looking to make it a little harder for us to track, they could just issue 2 checks of 24,000 each, and it would not show up on the report.
But that's certainly up to you how you would like it shown. Instead of looking at those payments, the single payments that are over 25,000. If you want to see a listing of all accounts that had total expenses recorded in excess of 25,000, we could go that approach. I would certainly want to restrict that or not include your payroll expenses, because that would be pretty onerous. There'd be
Right.
a lot of things in there. But as far as your service supplies, I can certainly amend the report so that it's capturing the data that way, if you prefer.
Well, I don't know. I'm asking the committee for some input on this. Are we getting what we need from the 25K report as is, or should we instead look to include any line item that's over 25,000 in a month with appropriate references for it?
Andy, this is Tom Hauser. I think this is a topic that we do need to discuss seriously. And one of my questions is 25,000 that big an expenditure these days that we should be
Right.
going at that level? Maybe it should be 50,000. And so I think we have to have a philosophical discussion about this, probably some other time, because we're 10 minutes after 4 and people want to go home by 5 maybe. Some library personnel and county personnel like to consider that as a possibility.
Okay.
So I'd like to just have this as a separate item some other time. And it's really good that that has come out, because I was thinking what you were thinking, that was $25,000 to these people for that project.
Yeah, okay. So Tom, thank you. I think we'll move on, and I'll take that as, Jane, let's note that as a topic for our next finance committee meeting.
Okay.
Okay, so I understand what you're saying, Randy. At this point, it's single vouchers over 25K. We recognize that may pose some limits, but obviously it's good for us to keep an eye out on those larger expenses. Before we move on, any other questions or comments on voucher payments over 25K?
I would just wonder if some of these are specifically COVID related, which doesn't mean that they won't continue to be an issue. But for example, if janitorial services were divided into specific ways to deal with certain pieces of the library or something like that, that could be one of the reasons why this particular one popped up. I would wonder whether there are other, I think the question certainly that I think you're asking is, are there other pockets that are also being divided that way? So that certainly, I'd be interested in knowing that as well.
Okay, yeah, I think this will be worth a closer look.
Yeah.
Okay. So Randy, so far it's summary, cash balance summary, payments over 25K. What do you think we should, where should we go next?
I would, at this point, maybe for interest of time, let's pick one of the detail tabs and I can walk you through. They're all the same. So as far as basically how they're set up and what they're trying to do.
Okay.
Maybe one of the smaller ones would be easier for folks to follow along.
Well, when you say the detail tabs, it's either going to be property tax or sales tax, right?
Sure, either one.
Okay. I'm going to pick property tax. I realize, let me just say one thing about property tax. Which would you prefer?
I would prefer the sales tax. It looks like we're scheduled to make more than $2 million more this fiscal year than we had planned.
Yeah, so
awfully good news.
Let's go to the sales tax. But one question, and I'm not sure how this happened, but Randy, it looks to me in the PDF packet that the property tax report didn't come out in the right sequence. That revenue is always going to come out or should always come out before expenditures. Is that correct?
Normally, yes. That's how I set these up.
Yeah, so just FYI to the commission, page 10 in your packet should actually appear before page 8. So when you go back to review the property tax report, you're going to be looking first. Now, of course, there has not been much revenue in property tax, but in general, we're going to expect to see revenue first and then expenditures. But for our purposes today, rather than looking at pages 8, 9, and 10, let's look at the sales tax report which is pages 6 and 7, and which did show up in the correct order. So, Randy, I'm going to let you kind of guide us here, and just this is looking familiar to me, but I'd appreciate, from your perspective, if you'd tell us, what we have here and what you think we should be focusing on.
Is the size okay for this?
I'm going to suggest you can enlarge it for the moment to focus on the shaded section. Is that okay, Randy?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then we can scan over to look at the final columns. Okay.
So this is the same as the September reports that I first sent out. The changes that have been made, however, is that you may notice that there's now numbers entered into future months, and on the very top I have the notation that these are prior year actuals. So this is for comparative purposes, when you're looking at the grand totals in the far right of the report, it's an attempt to kind of give you a better sense as where you are and where you're going based upon what happened last year. As you mentioned, the shaded portion, the two blue columns represent your original budget that was originally submitted to the county, and then any adjustments that you make during the year would be reflected in the adjusted budget column. It's very common at this time of the year that they're both going to be exactly the same. And then obviously the green shading represents the actuals so far this year. As you mentioned, I've got separated out into your different your revenue on top, your major categories of revenue. So your tax revenue, your interest income, and any miscellaneous revenues are presented here. If we can maybe move over to the right now. So I think this is where the kind of the meat and potatoes come into play with these reports, is the summary on the right side, where you have your year-to-date totals, what the budget percentage year-to-date is, and so basically that's just taking your year-to-date actuals, dividing it by your approved budget to show you where you are on a percentage basis. And I really like this column, as Andy, you suggested this, the prior actuals through the same time frame. So you can see that we are 4.8 million in sales tax so far this year. Same time last year, you're at 2.5 million, which is a very good sign.
Yeah, that's a great sign.
Now the estimated 2021 column is going to basically it's just taking the sum of July through June. So it's your current year actuals and your prior actuals added together. Shows that we're, again, it's a very, very rough estimate, but this is where we're projecting now. You end up at 12.4 million in total sales tax. And again, there's a big caveat with that, because obviously COVID didn't start until really, March, April. And I think you see the numbers dipping, like in June, the 877 we had last year. Keep in mind, I need to back up a little bit, is that the amounts that we're receiving from the state for sales tax collection is what they actually received 2 months prior. So what you're seeing in June was what the state collected in the month of April.
Right.
It takes that long for them to get everything collected and then remitted to us. So there's going to always be that lag as far as when you're trying to do a comparison year to year. You have to make sure you have to understand what month those taxes were actually generated.
So Randy, I'm going to stop you for one second, if I may, because you said something that I thought was great, and I had not picked it up just by looking at the report, and that's that it's the next to last column, the one that says estimated fiscal year 2020-2021. And what I believe I heard you say is that the number in that column you get by taking the actuals year to date plus the prior year actuals for the months coming. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think a really valuable tool, especially for those expenses that tend to be somewhat lumpy rather than spread out continuously over the same, equal amounts per month.
Right.
I have a question about these two columns. Just the figures you mentioned, it looks like the estimate is that actually, when all is said and done for the current fiscal year, we will have taken in $2 million plus more than we took in last in Measure Y. Now, we will remember we budgeted the 10 million for actual last year, and we were told our budget for this year was going to be about the same, but instead of going, it looks like we're going to be better off this year on sales tax than we were last year, and we were planning about that the sky might fall. So I think this is good, and I think it goes on along with national trends. I subscribe to The Economist, and their thing this week says, in September for this country, retail sales were more than 5% up on the previous year. So we were afraid of a consumer spending collapse here in this county. I'm glad it hasn't happened, and this means we're much better off than we thought we were.
So far.
Not going to argue with you about that, Dave. My request to the committee, I don't know if you had a chance to look at this. I looked it over, and I had a couple of questions, I guess, for Ann. Before I go there, Randy, let me ask you something. In my, somewhat simple-minded approach, my starting point is usually looking at budget percent year to date. And I'm thinking, okay, this is 4 months into the year. So I would expect for those expenses that are relatively constant, that we should be at 33% of our budget or less. And as a result, numbers that are above 33% are going to jump out at me. Is that a reasonable way to start looking at something like this?
I think so. Yep.
So to that point, first number we see, Dave, as you're saying, sales and use tax, we're at 49% of our budget, even though we're only a third of the way in. That's great. That's a good news message. Below that, though, we had a couple of expenses that were somewhat higher than expected. The first is line. Jane, could you swing back over to the left, please? Yeah. So the first is in the total. Well, it's really 50701, permanent position, local bids. We're at 45% of our budget, so we're basically running about a month and a half ahead of where we would expect. And similarly, if you can scroll down, please, to 51803.
Too far.
Too far. Stop. That's it. 51803, other contract services. That was also at 46%. Ann, do you have any insights for us on why those two expense items are running ahead of where we would expect to see them?
Well, I'm going to be guessing a little bit here. I would want to discuss with Suzanne about the question about the personnel positions there, but my thought would be, we had several months where we were paying a lot of disaster leave and bonuses, not bonuses, but a supplemental amount to people who were essential employees. So that could have contributed to the higher than expected expense for the staffing there. The one on other contract services, I'm not sure what was included in that. I would guess that would be some of these facilities projects we're working on, Roseland and Petaluma.
Okay. I think my request for today would just be if you could get with your team and dig into those items a little bit. The good news on the employee count is that on the property tax, there's a similar line item, and there we're at 30%, so we're actually running a little bit below. And as we saw, I think if we were to add the percent year to date on the original overview report, we'd see that we're probably okay overall. But if you could dig into those and just let us know, I'd appreciate it.
And Eric, if I can interrupt you for a second, Andy, that was one of the things I wanted to interject is because you are actually posting your payroll to two separate funds, I think it's really, keep that in mind that you kind of want to look at them as a whole and not each individual fund. Yeah.
Absolutely. Fair enough. So, does anybody on the committee have any questions for Randy on the format or information that's included in the budget to actual, whether it's for sales tax like the one we're looking at, or whether it's for property tax, which is set up exactly the same way?
If I could ask real quick, if you could scroll all the way down to the bottom of this report for me. There's one last thing I wanted to point out right there. So I added this capital expenditure summary is something that was not in the September report, and this is something that we like to do for all of our clients that have capital projects. So what you'll see is if you can scroll just a little bit up, very slowly.
Other way.
Oh,
Yeah, so,
way?
So notice that on total capital expenditures near the top of the screen right now, the one that has double asterisks, you'll see at October a total of $74,594, and in the capital expenditure summary box here has that same total, but I've broken it out by project. So that's where the cost accounting comes into play, where you're able to kind of further drill down on an expense to see what's made up, what makes up that expense. Again, this is for me to do this, I had to drill down on the actual invoices to come up with the description, because it doesn't look like they're set up with transactional cost accounting codes or the TCA codes that are at much of the level of detail that I have here. So I just wanted to point that out as an additional feature that I added in for the October reports.
That's great, Randy. Thank you. And any questions from the committee on this budget to actual report for the sales tax or property tax? Okay, the only two reports that we have left are the statements of special fund activity, and those are on pages 12 and 13 in the packet. Page 12 is related to the sales tax. Page 13 is related to the property tax. They look like they're set up the same way. Randy, could you take us through one of them and explain what we're looking at and what we should be thinking about as we review it?
Sure. These are basically what we call your fund balance statements. This is a budgeting tool. This is something that the CAO's office here for the county looks at very closely for every single fund that they have oversight over. It basically is showing you what you actually have available to budget against in the next fiscal year. You'll notice about the middle of this report, there's an ending fund balance available for budgeting row that currently shows for 2021 $11,116,016. That's showing based upon your beginning fund balance at the very top there, which is essentially the same number, and then what you have budgeted, both revenues and expenses, which essentially are the same number. That's what you have available to budget against next year. The one caveat that I have is that not knowing what type of designations or reservations or assignments that you folks have decided on, that should be incorporated in here as well. If you have assigned a certain amount of your fund balance towards pensions or towards rate stabilization or something like that, that should be included in here so that when you go to do your budget for 21-22, you actually have a correct beginning fund balance that you can budget against.
This is Barbara. Can I comment on that? I think
Yes,
this is to my original question about terminology where we've had different uses of terms. But I believe that the opening here is to point out that we do have a fund balance policy, which we're calling our reserves. And so I think what you're saying is that if we pull out our fund balancing policy and our reserves are supposed to be 15% of a current operating budget, there would be a line for that on there. And then the undesignated would be not $11 million, but $11 million minus that 25%, right?
yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so we do need to get the fund balance policy out, dust it off and add it in there to show that really clearly what we're putting aside.
And just maybe explain real quick, if you'd like, the mechanics of what this statement's doing. The top section that you see, so I'm not talking about the detailed fund balance components, just the section above that. That is basically looking at your fund balance, how it's affected by your revenues and your expenditures, and then any type of minor adjustments that are made that need to be made to it's bean counter adjustments. Let me just put it that way, to arrive at your ending fund balance that's available for budgeting. And then if you look at the lower section, the detailed fund balance components, you'll see the exact same number. So the 6/30/20 ending number of 11,116,019 agrees to the ending number for your actual of 19/20. So those should always be the same numbers. And what this is just doing is from the accounting side is making sure that we have captured everything appropriately. All of these accounts on this bottom section, these are your balance sheet accounts, your permanent accounts. These are the only accounts, however, that are relevant to fund balance. These are only reflect your current assets and current liabilities that will impact what you actually have available to spend against in your next fiscal year.
So Randy, following up on Barbara's point, if we have a fund balance policy which says that we need to have a reserve equal to a certain percentage of our budget, would that show up as an adjustment to reserve / encumbrance, or where would that appear? How would we note that on this summary?
That's a perfect question. It would actually appear on both sides or both sections. You would see it in the adjustments to reserves and encumbrances section. You would also see it in your detailed fund balance components as a negative in your detailed fund balance components to reduce that amount that's available. And you'd see it on the top section as well.
Okay. And so in addition to that, for example, we have a policy that we need to make OPEB contributions of a certain amount every year. Would that also show up in both places as an encumbrance and a negative to the components?
To the extent that it's not already running through your expenses, I believe most of your OPEB expenses should be recorded during the year-end closing, and actually might be an audit adjustment when your auditors go through and make those adjustments. They would record those as expenses. So that would be shown as what we call a post-audit adjustment. It would appear in here.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Randy on this final statement of special fund activity? Randy, I really want to thank you for, first of all, for preparing these documents, but also for taking us through them and educating us about what we're looking at. I know we've taken a lot of time to do that today, and I appreciate certainly how busy you are, and so thank you for doing that. I feel like going forward, we'll be able to zero in more quickly on the content now that we have a better understanding of what we're looking at. Before we let Randy go, does anybody on the committee have anything to add or ask about any of the reports that we've seen?
Yes, Randy, I'm a junior member of the Finance Committee. I followed the statements sort of generally in the packet as they come out every month. Let me just say this is night and day. It's a marvelous look at our system, and it's so much more helpful we've ever gotten in the past 2 years. So I really appreciate this.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Dave. Any other comments? I think we're going to continue briefly. I know Mr. Hauser's watching the clock assiduously for us, and I appreciate it. But Randy, we're going to let you go. And thanks so much. I know we'll be following up by email, but very, very grateful for your time today and all the expertise you have brought.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you, Randy.
Okay. First of all, I know this took a lot of time, and I hope and expect that going forward, we will be able to move much more expeditiously through the financial reports, but I felt it was a worthwhile investment to understand what we're going to be looking at. I wanted to talk briefly about getting started on the 2021 budget. And I have a kind of an opening statement, I guess, and then I'd like to hear from the committee and from Ann. The budget is the most direct expression of our strategic priorities. You know, where we put our money is, I think, the most direct expression of where we're focused as an organization. And I know that our strategic planning process has been disrupted somewhat because of the coronavirus, and so we don't have the full information that we would need. On the other hand, I think that we've seen over the last 8-9 months a significant impact on our organization, and that it's appropriate that we are asking, as we look ahead to the next fiscal year, how should we be allocating our limited public resources to best serve the Sonoma community? My concern is that in the absence of doing something different, we're going to just end up looking at previous year's budgets and nibbling around the edges, rather than taking a more in-depth look at what we're doing and why, and how that might change. So I wanted to bring up to this committee the possibility of asking the departments to make some presentations to us in future meetings about their budget information, how they're currently allocating their funds, and what they see as the strategic priorities that are impacting them, so that when we come to the budget workshop, we'll be in a better position to ask intelligent questions and hopefully make some smart decisions. What are your thoughts on that, and how do you think we can be most helpful in this process?
Who are you addressing that to, Andy?
I'm going to address it first to the committee, Barbara.
Okay. I'll just start off, and I would say I
Please.
agree 100% with what you said. We've always had this discussion, but never quite gotten there about this, the exact point. The budget does express the priorities. And I do agree with what you're saying. The strategic plan is so hard to try to even get our heads around, but we do have to have an idea of where we're going. And in the past number of years, the commissioners have expressed what their priorities have been, and we had a kind of consolidation of our ideas. And I think that we're you know, we're in a place right now where it would be great to hear from the staff and department level. So I just second what you said all the way around. Thank you.
Thanks for your input. Dave, Thomas, Deborah, what do you
I
think
agree.
on this?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Andy. I think this is I would approve this program moving ahead wholeheartedly.
I actually think that, and this goes along with what you're saying, but I think that that if we're going to hear from the staff about priorities, then it needs to be the full commission. I think that the full commission needs to hear it and give input. I don't think it belongs specifically in the finance committee.
I'm certainly okay with that, Deborah. I guess my question, or where I would hope we would end up, it's too much to do in any one meeting. So my hope or request would be that we look at the departments and we designate a specific number of them for each of the coming meetings. December is probably going to be too close because it's only 2 weeks off, but that for January, February, March, we make that part of the commission meeting, having them presenting to us on what they're doing, what their priorities are, and how they think they should be changing. Would that be something you would be able to support?
I'd certainly support that. I also think that at the same time, the commission needs to look at some strategic goals of our own. And so before the staff gets here, or as the staff is bringing their ideas and their projects to us, I think we need to also be looking outward as opposed to inward as well.
Yeah.
And I completely agree with that. I think in many ways, first, you're absolutely right that the budget has to reflect our strategic plan and our priorities in terms of how we serve our communities, but we haven't gotten the input from the communities yet. We don't know what their priorities are or what their needs are. So in some ways, I think it would be unfair to ask the staff to anticipate before we have that kind of data. They can certainly talk about what they see on the community level in terms of dealing with their patrons. And they can talk about what they've done so far, what they would like to do, but we've got to have the community input before we plan any kind of major pivoting of our budget and our priorities.
I'd like to react to that a little bit, Ann, if I could, because I understand and agree with it. And yet I feel a little bit like, I think it was Steve Jobs who basically said something to the effect that, if you ask people what they want, they can only think about what they already have. I feel like a missing piece that would be helpful would be, and we would rely on you and your team for this, would be to look at what innovative libraries across the country have been doing, especially most recently in response to the pandemic. Because my feeling is that what the pandemic has probably done is not so much change, but rather accelerate whatever changes were already in the works. And that would be an important data point for us to have as well. So I think it would be certainly whatever information we can get directly from the public we serve would be terrific. I'd also like to hear from the departments around what are they thinking they should be doing differently and why. And it would be great to bring in outside information so we could be seeing what other organizations are doing. That said, if this is going to be something in front of the full commission, then it's not really a topic for now, and I should just shut up.
This is helpful. So.
Okay. Well, let's take this discussion offline then.
Well, let me express an opinion. We have 3 different lines that have been discussed. One is we have to reach out to the community for long-term planning. But everything's such a mess right now with the COVID how do we do that? So that's one issue. The other issue is, should we ask the staff where they think maybe a library should be going? And then the third issue is, what are the priorities that the commission has in the last few years? We've tried to elucidate 3 priorities or something like that to let the staff expand upon and come back with the budget. So all 3 of those are valid, and we need to discuss how we can bring all 3 of them together in the mess we're in right now. And I'm not sure, I don't have an answer.
I don't either, but it's not going to be up to the finance committee to solve that. So I think I'm going to leave this with Deborah and suggest that you figure out the best venue for us, if that's okay.
Thank you.
I'm kicking it upstairs.
I appreciate that.
Sorry, Deborah.
No, it's perfectly fine.
Okay. So then, as far as items to include for the next finance committee meeting, Tom's already suggested that we dig in a little bit on the 25K report. I think that's fine. We can certainly do that. And any other specific topics you would like to cover in the next finance committee meeting?
What is our timeline? Because this is November, next month is December. What's the timeline for the budget going to be? We have to really start thinking about that. And I'd like staff to, we've got a timeline, let's get it in writing, and then we can pass it on to the whole commission, and the staff has it in mind, I think. So I'd
We
like
had
to
it in
see-
we had a time frame in the last commission packet. I can send you another.
Well, but I
Yeah.
think we need to kind of reiterate that exactly what we're doing, where we're going,
Okay.
and
All right.
have a countdown sort of to keep us on our toes and keeping up with it. Because it's always something that keeps sliding a little behind, so we need to really get with it.
I'm seeing, Jane, I'm seeing the date here, and that's not the date I have in my calendar. For some reason, I had this meeting on the 21st.
You're exactly right. I apologize. This should be the 21st. The advocacy is the 14th.
Okay, no worries. And any other topics for the next finance committee meeting?
An update on the CFO, if it's appropriate at the time.
I think that's a good addition. I think maybe update / discussion on the audit. Is that a reasonable topic?
Mhm.
Yes, very reasonable.
Got it. Yeah.
Okay.
We're now 2 up behind.
Yeah. Anything else? I understand, considering how long this meeting has run, I understand anybody's hesitance in adding a topic. I do promise that future meetings will proceed more quickly. I'm really going to try to leverage what we've learned from Randy to help us move quickly through the financial reporting, focus on those things that need attention, and move on. So I hope that you will see this as an investment in our future rather than just an expense of time. That said, anything to add? I'd like to thank the committee and all those members of the staff and the commission who were here as observers today. I hope you got as much out of the session as I did. And thank you. And see you all soon. We'll adjourn at 4:49. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you,
And
Commissioner
Andy, I want
Malkin.
to thank you for the effort you put out going through all this stuff so assiduously. Thank you.
My pleasure, Tom. Thank you, sir. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care.